So children, welcome back. We are into the next session of ratio analysis. In the second session, we are going to study about the second classification of ratios, that is solvency ratios. Solvency. What is solvency? Solvency is the ability of the firm to meet its long-term liabilities. So in the first session, we learned about current ratio, where we learned that it is the ability of the firm to meet its current liabilities. But here we are going to study about the ability of the firm to meet its long-term liabilities. So what is solvency, children? Solvency means the ability of the firm to meet its long-term liabilities. So what is this long-term liabilities? Long-term liabilities are those liabilities which can be set off by a firm in a span of more than 1 year, which is spanning for more than 1 year, is known as long-term liabilities. Like long-term provisions, long-term borrowings, for example, debentures. So children, what is solvency ratio? Solvency ratio means, or solvency ratio is being calculated to find out whether the firm is able to meet its long-term liabilities. Again, solvency ratios can be classified into 4 types. Solvency ratio can again be classified into 4 types. First one is debt equity ratio. Second one is total assets to debt ratio. Third one is proprietary ratio. And fourth one is interest coverage ratio. So my dear students, in this session, I am going to make you familiar with the first 2 ratios. And in the coming session, I will make you clear the remaining ratios. So what are the classifications of solvency ratios? First one is debt equity ratio. Second one is proprietary ratio. Third one is total assets to debt ratio. And fourth one is interest coverage ratio. So let me wipe out the last 2 ratios, that is proprietary ratio and interest coverage ratio, which we are going to study in our third session. In our second session, we are going to learn about debt equity ratio and total assets to debt ratio. So first I am going to tell you in detail what is debt equity ratio. So children, as we learned in our first chapter, in our first session, relating to current ratio and liquid ratio, in debt equity ratio also, we are going to apply a formula. What is the formula for calculating debt equity ratio? It is very simple, children. It is pretty simple. From the term itself, we can find out the formula. That is, debt equity ratio is equal to debt by equity. Debt equity ratio is equal to debt divided by equity. So what is this debt? This debt is known as long-term debt. This debt is long-term debt. And what is equity? Equity is equal to share capital plus reserves and surplus. Again, I am going to give you it in detail. So let's learn what is debt. What is debt, children? Debt is equal to long-term borrowings plus long-term provisions. So what is debt? Debt is long-term borrowings plus long-term provisions. Both these together is known as long-term liabilities. So what is equity? Equity is equal to share capital plus reserves and surplus. You are familiar with these terms. Share capital, reserves and surplus. Again, I am going to make it clarified to you. Share capital is equal to equity share capital plus preference share capital. So what is reserves and surplus? reserves and surplus is equal to securities premium plus general reserve plus capital reserve plus statement of profit and loss. I have made it very clarified to you. Debt equity ratio can be found out by applying the formula debt by equity. By applying the formula debt by equity. So what is debt? Debt involves long-term debt. That is long-term borrowings plus long-term provisions. What is equity? Equity is equal to share capital plus reserves and surplus. Share capital is equal to equity share capital plus preference share capital. What is reserves and surplus? Reserves and surplus includes 4 items. What are they? Securities premium, general reserve, capital reserve and statement of P&L. Okay children. So if I give you a question, definitely you can answer it very well if you study these things. And it is also not a hard nut to crack. So here also there is an ideal ratio. The ideal debt equity ratio is equal to 2:1. What is the ideal debt equity ratio? It is 2:1. So lower the ratio, better it is for the firm. And higher the ratio, highly risky it is for the firm. So here children, that is all about debt equity ratio. Now I am going to make you clear about the second ratio, that is total assets to debt ratio. Let's start. The second ratio is total assets to debt ratio. So children, here also you can very well come to the formula for calculating total assets to debt ratio. That is total assets divided by long-term debt. Total assets divided by long-term debt. Actually children, this ratio, that is total assets to debt ratio, is a slight variation of the debt equity ratio. The total assets to debt ratio expresses the relationship between total assets and total debts. That is the long-term debts. So as you all know, I have made it clear to you what is long-term debts. Long-term debts is equal to long-term borrowings plus long-term provisions. That is long-term borrowings plus long-term provisions. So what is total assets? It's very simple, pretty simple. Total assets is equal to current assets plus non-current assets. Current assets include stock, prepaid expense, bills receivable, debtors. What is non-current assets? Fixed assets. That is, it includes tangible as well as intangible. Fixed assets, goodwill, patents, trademarks and so on. So children, what is total assets to debt ratio? Total assets to debt ratio expresses the relationship between total assets and long-term debts. Total assets is equal to current assets plus non-current assets, and total debts, that is long-term debts, is equal to long-term borrowings plus long-term provisions. Higher the ratio, better it is for the firm. Lower the ratio, the firm is in a risky position. So children, in the second session, we have learned about the 2 classifications of solvency ratio. One is debt equity ratio and another one is total assets to debt ratio. Debt equity ratio can be found out by applying the formula debt by equity, and total assets to debt ratio can be found out by applying the formula total assets to long-term debts. So children, study it well, stay home and stay safe. Let us meet in the third session. Bye-bye.